Power Play on this Wednesday evening. I'm Vashi Capellos. Tonight, will Canada hit back?
We will take some time, not much, some time.
We need to react immediately. Everything's on the table right now.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford wants Canada to hit back fast after Trump doubles tariffs on steel and aluminum to a whopping 50%. But Prime Minister Mark Carney is biding his time. Will Ontario take retaliation into its own hands? In moments, the province's Economic Development Minister will be here live, and I'll ask him. Then, the Prime Minister's first confidence vote.
We believe we have a mandate to deliver on our program for Canadians.
We can't support a throne speech that so badly misses the mark.
The House of Commons is set to vote on the throne speech next hour. It's a confidence vote, meaning if the government were to lose, we'd be back to an election. The NDP is first out of the gate to say they will vote against the government. We'll find out why from interim leader Don Davies. And we'll go through the other parties' positioning ahead of that vote this evening with our front bench. Tonight, Sharon Carr, Jamie Ellerton, Carl Belanger, and Rob Benzie will be here. That's coming up in just a bit. First, though.
He promised he was the man with the plan. He can't even get a deal. Our workers are terrified about losing their jobs. And he promised that he'd collect $20 billion in retaliatory tariffs, but then secretly drop those tariffs to zero during the campaign. If he's so sure that he's still going to collect $20 billion, why not table a budget and prove it to Canadians?
We have retaliatory tariffs on over $90 billion worth of U.S. goods. We are in intensive negotiations with the Americans and in parallel preparing reprisals if those negotiations do not succeed.
We will start tonight with the latest punch from the U.S. President Donald Trump doubling down on steel and aluminum tariffs, which as of midnight now sit at 50%. The big question at this point, what does Canada do in response? Ontario's Premier Doug Ford wants the feds to hit back and hit back fast.
I want to make sure that we get a deal. I understand we're close to making a deal, and I want to make sure that the federal government slaps another 25% on their steel. But regards to electricity, everything's on the table right now.
Prime Minister Mark Carney in Ottawa, inundated with questions from the opposition in the House of Commons this afternoon about just that. How will Canada respond? Will there, for example, be commensurate counter tariffs? Here's what he said.
We have counter tariffs in a gross amount before remissions on over $90 billion of U.S. imports. We've acted strong. Those are in place. We will take some time, not much, some time, because we are in intensive discussions right now with the Americans on the trading relationship. Those discussions are progressing. I would note that the American action is a global action. It's not one targeted at Canada. So we will take some time, but not more.
For more on what this country's next move in response to Trump might be, Ontario's Economic Development Minister Vic Fedeli is with us live. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
I know, Minister, that the Premier was asking that the federal government immediately respond with commensurate counter tariffs. Do you concede, though, that could be putting at risk a bigger deal that the Prime Minister references is being discussed or negotiated behind the scenes?
Well, look, a deal is needed for sure. The tariffs are worldwide. Other than the UK, they've been exempted because they made a deal. So yes, we've got to have the feds get the deal done. That's absolutely needed.
But if you if the feds do, as the Premier indicates, and immediately say, okay, we're responding, and I understand the impetus for it because these are very punitive in nature, the tariffs that the U.S. are leveling, but if, in fact, we do respond with 25% tariffs, does that not risk further antagonizing the Americans at what might be a particularly, potentially, I should say, fruitful time?
Well, you know, the deal that's needed is based on quite a wide variety of items and issues. We can still go ahead and put a matching tariff back on the U.S. There's no question that we should be doing that and doing that right away. But we can still be negotiating the deal. I'm sure they will understand the requirement and the need from the people of Canada want that to happen.
Why are you sure that they will understand that? And I do, again, I'm not trying to, I guess, dismiss the impetus for doing so. I understand the tens of thousands of workers employed by this industry who will be, their jobs put at risk by these additional tariffs, which are already quite high to begin with. But ultimately, if the federal government is arguing that, doing so, it seemed like they were today at least, doing so would put at risk the potential for something more. My guess is they seem to impart the sense that perhaps the Americans would take very badly to something like that right now.
Well, we take very badly to the fact that they put a 50% tariff on our businesses and ultimately on our families and on our workers. So you can continue to negotiate in good faith a deal that's all-encompassing while making sure they understand. You've added an extra sting on Canada and the world. We've got to have an opportunity to retaliate back. There's just no question that has to happen.
Have there been any conversations since the Premier made his comments between either himself or yourself or anyone in the provincial cabinet and their counterparts in the federal cabinet? Like, is there any indication coming to your government from the feds that they ultimately will pursue the path that you're asking them to?
Well, that's the Premier's discussions with the Prime Minister. But I can tell you our discussions have been with the steel companies for weeks now, up to and including yesterday. So long before the additional tariffs were even ever thought of, we've been dealing with the steel companies, looking for alternate things that they can be producing. There's a wide variety of things they can be expanding into, and a wide variety of products that they can add. And the Premier's goal is ultimately everything that we import from the U.S., we ultimately want to make here in Canada, and specifically for us, here in Ontario, plain and simple.
If the federal government doesn't go ahead with counter tariffs, with commensurate counter tariffs, what is your province prepared to do for retaliation?
Well, first of all, the Premier has said it already today. Everything's on the table, absolutely everything. We'll look at every opportunity we can. But for the businesses and for the families, we've put in $30 billion worth of relief that was in our budget just a couple of weeks ago. Now, yes, the feds have the lead. And we're going to expect them to be able to help the steel companies and the employees. There's no question about that. But we've already triggered $30 billion in relief. But again, we're more interested in the long-term success of these companies by making new products, making additional products, and expanding the products that they make. There's certain products that the steel companies make today that don't supply even 100% of the demand in Canada. We're still filling in with the U.S. We want them to expand, and we're ready to write the checks to help them expand certain lines and certain new products that they'll make.
And I do take note of that. But when you and the Premier say that everything is on the table, I think the specific question Canadians and Ontarians have is around the, electricity, right? Because a number of months ago, that is what happened. An additional tax was placed on electricity sent to American states. Is that something that you are prepared to do again? And if so, what would exactly trigger it?
Well, I'm going to go back to the Premier's answer today because I'm not going to usurp his answer. When he was asked the same question, his answer was, everything's on the table. And so I'm going to stick with his words.
And I respect that, but I, with respect, would have to just push back, Minister, because that is a very broad way of answering a very specific question. I take the point that it's not off the table, but my question on behalf of Canadians is, when exactly is it on the table? Is it only predicated, for example, on if the federal government does not impose its own commensurate counter tariffs, or will it go ahead regardless?
Well, you said it earlier. The federal government has said to us, we're working, we're getting closer to a deal. We need to take a little bit of time, as the Prime Minister said, not much. So let's just give everybody a little bit of time to do their deal. But in the meantime, Premier Ford is very serious that, I'm going to say it again, everything's on the table. So we don't want to interfere with the deal flow. We understand and respect that, but that's why we're working directly with the steel companies to make sure that that their employees are protected, that other things can be made with steel. There are, the meetings have been very productive over the last several weeks with these companies coming up with very creative ideas and just some plain business ideas to fill in all the gaps that we have in Canada. So that's more where we're spending our time, is making sure this is going to be, the expression would be it's going to be better in the long run. We're going to take that $30 billion of imported steel. We're going to make things here and never have to rely on them again.
It's against that backdrop, Minister, particularly when you talk about kind of shoring up the domestic economy within Ontario and more broadly across Canada, that I want to ask about Bill 5. My understanding is it just not too long ago passed in the legislature. And for everyone watching outside of Ontario, this is a piece of legislation that creates an economic zone where your government has deemed they want to see something that's of great importance to the province develop more quickly than it would have under normal circumstances, and allows your government to override municipal and provincial laws in those so-called economic zones. I would note first that the Premier, my understanding, wasn't there for the vote. There's been a lot of opposition to it, particularly from Indigenous groups that say this doesn't respect their treaty rights. Why do you need a law that overrides other laws to get things done, rather than just setting up a process that can streamline things but still acknowledges the rights of Indigenous people?
Well, all of this, first of all, there's no rights that would change. We have a duty to consult. None of that changes. That's all opposition hyperbole, to be very, very blunt about it. The Premier was in for one of the votes today, but the opposition decided to pull a whole bunch of stalling tactics and interfered with some extremely important meetings that were set up. And so they just kept changing the time that the final vote would be had until he wasn't there, and then held a vote. So just get beyond the politics of that for a second. But Bill 5, so this is all about really fighting Donald Trump and fighting these tariffs with things like our critical minerals. It takes 15 years to open a mine in Ontario. That just cannot be possible anymore. It's, we have a company from Australia that was here and said to the Premier, this $500 million investment, we're taking it to Australia where they'll open the mine in 2 years. We've been here 7 years trying to get permits. This is what has to change. It's just absolutely mandatory to be able to grow our economy and to not have any impediments in the way. The King himself said it in the throne speech: one process, one review.
And again, I think that's a fair thing to point out, the length of time. And I think Canadians, that's an argument that has resonated with Canadians who are frustrated at the pace or lack thereof of economic growth. But when you talk about it being, putting opposition hyperbole, it's not just the opposition who has voiced concerns. They are largely reflecting the concerns of various First Nations, for example, and groups that represent Indigenous people in Ontario who have come forward to say that they were not adequately consulted in the crafting of this. And I note that with great irony, the Premier said today when he was asked about the possibility of blockades or of protests because of those concerns, he said, you can't break the law. Simple as that. And yet this law in and of itself allows your government to override other laws that are already in place. Is that not ironic?
Well, again, nothing changes in our duty to consult with First Nations. Absolutely no changes. There's no labor laws that can be changed. I mean, we're not looking for a race to the bottom here. What we're trying to do is to speed up the productivity and speed up getting in the ground on our projects. We have so many exciting, game-changing projects like the Ring of Fire. There are all of these opportunities that are being held up in Ontario. And so putting in what we call the special economic zones, I mean, they can be used, for instance, to site a hospital. They can be used for an auto plant. They're all a myriad of these things that we can use them for. But it's not about changing any of the rights of any of the groups, including the important work that we do with the First Nations.
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time. I appreciate you making the time for the conversation tonight, as always. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.
Vic Fideli is the Minister for Economic Development in Ontario. In the face of the tariff threat we were just talking about with the minister from the United States, the Bank of Canada has decided to hold its key lending rate steady at 2.75%, citing so-called unusual uncertainty.
Uncertainty remains high. The Canadian economy is softer, but not sharply weaker. And we've seen some firmness in recent inflation data. Against this backdrop, we decided to hold the policy rate unchanged as we continue to gain more information on U.S. trade policy and its impacts. This means we are being less forward-looking than usual. We are focused on ensuring that Canadians continue to have confidence in price stability through this period of global upheaval. We will continue to support economic growth while ensuring inflation remains well controlled.
All right, so what do the feds do? Do they hit back, and how fast? We're going to talk about that with our front bench in just a little bit. Sharon Carr, Jamie Ellerton, Carl Belanger, and Rob Benzie will be here. But first, after a short commercial break, the Prime Minister faces his first confidence vote, likely about an hour and a half from now. The NDP first out of the gate to say they will not vote in favor of the throne speech. They'll vote against the government. We're going to find out why from the interim leader of the party, Don Davies, who will join me live on set next.
I think we have an exciting, ambitious agenda for Canada, and although we are in a minority parliament, we believe we have a mandate to deliver on our program for Canadians.
Will the Prime Minister listen to Parliament and table a budget that controls spending, lowers taxes, and cuts inflation so Canadians can afford to put food on the table?
This throne speech is not a worker-centred throne speech, and it does not deliver the priorities that we heard from millions of Canadians across this country. And so we can't support a throne speech that so badly misses the mark.
The final hours of House of Commons debate there on Prime Minister Mark Carney's governing blueprint, the speech from the throne. It'll be the first confidence vote for this new minority government, but it's already been amended in a vote the government lost, with the opposition agreeing on language to include calling for an economic update or budget before the House adjourns for the summer, and adding language on respecting the jurisdiction in institutions of provinces and Indigenous peoples. The NDP voted in favor of that amendment, but interim leader Don Davies announced today his team of 7 will vote no to the throne speech tonight. He is with us live in studio to explain why. Hi, Mr. Davies. Good to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
Great to be with you, Vashi.
So you said that this speech in that clip we just aired completely misses the mark. Why is that your view?
Well, 1.2 million Canadians sent us here with a pretty strong mandate, Vashi, to do things like fixing healthcare. To create good jobs for workers and to protect them, to build non-market housing, to support Indigenous peoples, especially with Indigenous housing as well. And this throne speech doesn't even mention the words healthcare. It doesn't mention employment insurance. It doesn't mention non-market housing. It doesn't mention Indigenous housing. So this is not a worker-centred throne speech by any means. In fact, it's a cut spending, cut taxes throne speech that any Conservative party in the world would have no problem supporting. And so for that reason, New Democrats can't support it. I
looked through the document to see if it said anything about health care. It did not. But the government and the Prime Minister during the campaign did promise to maintain and not cut health care transfers to provinces. It does talk about housing, though. It does talk about, for example, creating Build Canada homes. It talks about investing in new affordable housing, kind of expanding on or maybe rather emphasizing the kinds of promises that were made during the campaign. So it does talk about that. Why is that not satisfactory?
Well, again, can you imagine a throne speech by a Canadian federal government that fails to use the words healthcare? I mean,
isn't healthcare a provincial jurisdiction?
No, it's shared jurisdiction, and the federal government plays a very important role in not only in setting the terms of healthcare, but also setting the fiscal framework. So that's a terrible lapse and gap in the throne speech. In terms of housing, New Democrats believe that the real answer is in creating housing that people can afford. And that means non-market housing. It means cooperative housing. It means housing for Indigenous people. None of those are mentioned in this speech. So, I mean, I've been in Parliament 17 years. I've heard this Liberal government and the Conservatives talk about creating housing for almost 2 decades, and they've failed to do it. And so when they don't send a signal that they understand the problem that Canadians are facing, the real problem, the foundational problem of not having access to affordable housing, New Democrats are going to point that out.
But they do use the term affordable housing in the throne speech specifically. And during the campaign, the promises that they laid out did actually talk about non-market housing and emphasize the role. I think on many occasions I remember them talking about how there should be a bigger role for the federal government in creating affordable housing, not just making homes affordable for the broad swath of Canadians who can't afford them, but in particular low-income Canadians who don't have access to any kind of affordable housing. They did talk at length about that. Mm-hmm. Why is that not enough?
Well, CMHC and other federal housing bodies have been crystal clear that the market is incapable of providing affordable housing. So it's
But the Liberals agree. That's what they said during the campaign.
Yeah, but if they're not going to make a clear commitment to funding non-market housing, to funding cooperative housing, Indigenous housing, then those are just words in the throne speech. And we're not going to solve this problem that is so pervasive, Vashi, from every province and territory, in every corner of this country. Young people have given up hope of ever owning a home. Rent is skyrocketing, and a federal government that fails to acknowledge that it has to play an important role in financing non-market housing, because they're the only ones who will. Right? So by not mentioning non-market housing, this is a clear signal that this government is not intending to invest the money that's needed. The other thing I should point out is this throne speech sets the stage for $28 billion in federal spending cuts. They also talk about keeping spending under 2% and capping the public service. So this is sending a clear message that there is no extra money by this federal government to invest in the things that Canadians need, like an expanded healthcare system, like more non-market housing, like protections for workers. It's just not in the throne speech, and so that's why we're voting against it.
But I mean, to be fair, there are many more millions of Canadians who voted in the aggregate for the Conservatives and the Liberals. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer today laid out a path that shows, with the current trajectory and promises around spending, with revenues where they are, in a couple of years, we're looking at a situation where just solely servicing the debt in this country is going to be more than the transfers to provinces for health care. That is money that could be going to other things, but is servicing the debt now because of decisions that this Liberal government made over the last number of years, a government that your party explicitly kept in power. Like, doesn't it make sense for the government now to be looking at, hey, this is not sustainable?
Well, that's a question for the Liberals, I think, to answer.
But you're saying it's not a good thing that they're doing that. And I'm challenging you on that, saying, well, look at that situation. Like, shouldn't they be worried about spending? You know,
Vashi, I think a government is about setting priorities. And the priorities that are set forth in this throne speech are not the priorities of working people in this country. And Mr. Carney decided to take a conservative light approach to this throne speech. And as I've said before, this is the throne speech that any conservative government could have written. You know, cut spending, cut taxes. We think it's time to invest in Canadians. For instance, having a resilient, healthy economy, I think, requires a healthy, resilient population. So investing in healthcare is not an expenditure. To me, it's part of building the kind of Canadian economy that we need and supporting workers in this country that will, I think, lead to a stronger economy in the future. So it's a very different approach to governing that Mr. Carney chose here. We're in a minority parliament. He did not receive a majority mandate. It's incumbent upon a government in a minority to reach across the aisle and to make sure that any throne speech reflects the priorities of all the other parties. He did not do that in this case. And therefore, he did not earn the support of New Democrats. And if Mr. Carney wants the support of New Democrats as Parliament, we're sending a clear message that he better bring in policies that support working people in this country, or he can't count on our support.
But this vote essentially could, I mean, if other parties do the same thing, send us back into a federal election. Are you just disappointed that he didn't consult you?
No, it's not about us at all. It's about the 1.2 million, frankly, many, many more millions of Canadians who are counting on this government to respond to their needs. There's nothing in this throne speech that reduces the high prices of groceries or utilities or fuel. There's nothing in there that'll give them confidence.
There's no carbon tax. There's a middle class tax cut. Both of those things would address what you talked about.
Yeah, well, those are Conservative policies, aren't they? Didn't the Conservatives campaign on axing the tax? So, Mr. Carney,
but I'm just saying both. That's what Mr. I understand the argument. Believe me, I've quizzed the Liberals on it nonstop. I get what you're saying, but ultimately, if you're saying there's nothing in here for people around affordability, it's not true. Whether it's a Conservative or Liberal idea, it's in there. It's in the campaign and it's in the throne speech.
Well, there's a few measures in there. I don't think cutting the carbon tax provides Canadians with the kind of relief that I think they really need, which is, again, access to an affordable home. A secure job, protection for workers. Interestingly, we're talking today as Donald Trump announced 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Mr. Carney in the election promised that he would allocate the countervailing duties money to workers to protect them. Yet, so far, there's been nothing announced, not in the throne speech, not to date, that would give Canadian workers any protection from this. The words employment insurance are not mentioned in the throne speech. So when we face this grave threat from south of the border that threatens millions of Canadians' jobs and industries, by the way, how is it possible that a federal government cannot reach out and indicate policies that will protect the workers who are about to lose their jobs from this? New Democrats are standing up for workers and working families, and we're going to continue to advocate those policies to protect them.
Is there not a way, though, for you to advocate for that without sending us into another election? Do you think an election is best for all the working Canadians that you just detailed are in need?
Look, I don't think Canadians want an election at this point.
Then why are you casting a vote that could send us to one?
We're not. We analyzed the throne speech, and we're looking there to see if it reflects the priorities that were told to us by the millions of Canadians that we represent, which are working families. And look, no government is entitled to votes of opposition parties. No government gets a blank check. The Liberals aren't entitled to the opposition votes. They have to earn them. And we're sending a clear message to the Liberals that if they want New Democrat support, then they have to bring in policies that will help working people and working families in this country, and then they'll get our support.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Davies, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. Nice to see you as always.
Thank you, Vashi.
Don Davies is the interim leader of the NDP. We're going to take a quick break here on Power Play. On the other end of that break, our front bench will be here to talk about the throne speech vote that's coming up and also what to do about those new U.S. tariffs. Rob Benzie, Carl Belanger, Jamie Ellerton, and Sharon Carr. There they are. They're with me in just a moment.
Big issue is you can't fight a war without steel and aluminum production in America. You have to be able to make it. If you don't have the ability to make your own steel and aluminum, you can't fight a war. And that is what the president's doing. He's trying to make sure that we make sufficient steel and aluminum.
That is U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick defending President Donald Trump's move to double tariffs on steel and aluminum to 50%. As Canada and the U.S. continue to try and work out a new agreement of sorts, Prime Minister Mark Carney says his government will take some time to respond as those negotiations continue. Have a listen.
We have counter tariffs in a gross amount before remissions on over 90 billion of U.S. imports. We've acted strong. Those are in place. We will take some time, not much, some time, because we are in intensive discussions right now with the Americans on the trading relationship. Those discussions are progressing. I would note that the American action is a global action. It's not one targeted at Canada. So we will take some time, but not more.
So should Canada retaliate? And if so, when? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Sharon Carr is former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Jamie Ellerton is a Conservative strategist and the founder and principal of Canaptus. Former interim NDP National Director Carl Belanger is with us. He's now the president of Traction Strategies. And the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie rounds us out. Benzie, I'll start with you because you heard Mark Carney there, Premier Ford singing a very different tune. We had Minister Vic Fedeli on earlier in the program. They want counter tariffs to the same tune, another 25% immediately levied on the United States. Why do you think the feds are hesitant to go down that route?
I think, Vashi, that it's because they must be close to some kind of a deal. There was a kind of a look in Carney's eye today, I thought, that suggested that something must be imminent. And I mean, he made a point of talking about how these are global tariffs, not necessarily targeted at Canada. Now, at Queen's Park earlier today, when we were speaking with Premier Ford, he echoed what Minister Vic Fedeli, I guess Vic Fedeli technically echoed what Ford said, that he's a quote unquote 1,000% behind whatever retaliation that Prime Minister Carney's government chooses to take. But they're not doing anything beyond that right now. They're saber rattling for sure, and you still can't buy bourbon in Ontario or American or California wine on LCBO shelves. But there's no new retaliation from Ontario, even though Premier Ford was on U.S. cable networks today, pounding the drum and everything like that, sounding like he wants to go to a trade war. But I don't know. I suspect something must be imminent, either that or Carney's flat-footed.
How long, Carl, does the Prime Minister have to kind of, do something or share more with Canadians? I can understand not wanting to further antagonize the Americans if something is imminent, but I can also understand the kinds of questions he got from the opposition in the House of Commons today, which were like, hey, you told us a different story during the campaign.
Well, I think the Prime Minister was very clear. He's going to take some time, but not more, whatever that means. And the problem with that is that, of course, he doesn't want to have a hard deadline. But Canadians, they would like to see a government that, the way they campaign, elbows up, right? That's what the phrase was. That was the slogan. Yeah. And they would like the government to respond in kind. And but to be fair, the same goes for like Doug Ford. Whatever happened to raising prices on electricity, whatever happens on pulling the plug, that's the same kind of situation. Nobody wants to do anything to undermine the negotiations. But the question Canadians have is, will that new agreement be worth the paper it's written on? Because we have an agreement in place right now, and it's being disregarded by the Trump administration.
Yeah, and I think also, as a Canadian, I don't know if everyone else thinks this, I understand, Jamie, that you can't there's a desire right now not to negotiate this in public, but I don't really understand to what end there are negotiations. Like, what kind of agreement are you hoping to reach? What are the parameters? Like, what will this inform going forward? Like, what are we kind of waiting for with bated breath? No one has really answered any specifics on that.
Yeah, I think perhaps actually the most charitable thing you could say is we keep hearing reports that Minister LeBlanc is spending a ton of time down there. The fact these are unannounced trips and very productive, or ought to be very productive working meetings. I think when you look at how Mark Carney has communicated in his for just a few months as Prime Minister, he's not one prone to hyperbole. So that suggests to me that they think they have something imminent that is going to be something as it relates to whether it's a renegotiation of USMCA, whatever the Continental Security Agreement is. Whatever that is going to be suggests that the Prime Minister thinks there's something to be said there. And perhaps this is also, really, frankly, him testing President Trump in terms of what is the ability to make a deal and stick with it. Because I do think if you even go back to January, this made international news last week when he was asked about it in the White House. But the talk of trade's a real thing. Trump always chickens out. He often backs down at the 11th hour. And so what is the precarity of this going to be? And so I think what you're seeing from Prime Minister Carney right now is he's putting a lot of chips down on the table saying, let's buy some time. We're trying to work for something bigger. Minister LeBlanc's working on it. If he comes back empty-handed and there's not something real, and you're starting to see mass layoffs at steel production facilities overnight, that political honeymoon and kind of that time for goodwill, not today, but just a bit of time, or however it was that Carl quoted it back to it, the urgency for now is going to be really quick when those layoffs get issued.
Not to put a specific date on it, Sharon, but how much time do you think the feds have before they have to show some of their work?
I think they have a short runway, to be honest. I don't think they've got a lot of time to show what they've gotten at. But when we just watched Prime Minister Carney's comments, and I think everyone's kind of mentioned that here, I think what we're seeing here is the Prime Minister not negotiate in public. We saw previously in the past administration, and while it worked at the time, where there was counter tariffs and threats put right back, I don't think it's going to work this time around. And I think Prime Minister Carney is trying to keep a measured, tempered approach where he is not not litigating counter tariffs in public. He's going to have those conversations in private. He's going to allow his minister to be down there and have those discussions. But I think this is purely a tactic to not, one, rattle President Trump further, not to even just give him a bit of rope to say, look, I'm going to come at you guys and I'm going to throw more at you. So I think this is purely a measured approach. And it sounds like they probably are having some thoughtful, meaningful discussions to get to a point where we don't have these additional tariffs. But I think it's purely for them not to negotiate in public. He's treating this like he probably would a business deal and not doing it through the media.
How come you think, though, Benzie, Ford and the premier and the prime minister are saying kind of different things at different times, like especially since they all just met? I thought that was interesting that, you know, Ford decided to take a different approach today.
I think, but maybe it's a two-pronged approach, Vashi. I mean, you and I were in Saskatoon. We saw the love-in there between these two guys and frankly, the other dozen premiers. It was a pretty amicable situation. I think that Premier Ford is almost going to be the bad cop, maybe, and then Carney can be the calm and measured. I mean, look, it's going to be up to Mark Carney to tell to the U.S. government that he's going to get rid of the digital services tax, or he's going to buy F-35s, or whatever the things that the Americans are going to want to get a new deal. And I think that's not Doug Ford's call. I think to Carl's point, it's telling that Mr. Ford isn't pulling the plug on or adding that 25% surcharge on the electricity that Ontario sells to 1.5 million customers in Michigan and New York. I think that was significant. And I know it's still significant that Ontario hasn't returned American booze to its liquor store shelves. I know that rankles the Americans. We know that because they've been yesterday at the U.S. ambassador was visiting Mr. Ford here at Queen's Park and made a point about that. So it's weird. Something must be happening beneath the surface because if it isn't, then Mr. Carney has some explaining to do.
Okay, on that note, speaking of Mr. Carney, he's going to face his first confidence vote in the next hour or so, we anticipate. On the throne speech, we're going to talk about the dynamics at play there after a short commercial break with the front bench. They're back in just a moment.
I think we have an exciting, ambitious agenda for Canada, and although we are in a minority parliament, we believe we have a mandate to deliver on our program for Canadians.
Will the Prime Minister listen to Parliament and table a budget that controls spending, lowers taxes, and cuts inflation so Canadians can afford to put food on the table?
This throne speech is not a worker-centred throne speech, and it does not deliver the priorities that we heard from millions of Canadians across this country. And so we can't support a throne speech that so badly misses the mark.
Sometime in just about the next hour, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is set to face its first test in the House of Commons. MPs are set to vote on the speech from the throne, which will be a confidence vote. The NDP has already said that they're going to vote against it, meaning the minority Liberal government will need either the Conservatives or the Bloc to back it. Earlier this week, all opposition parties voted for a Tory amendment to the speech, calling on the feds to table an economic update before Parliament breaks for the summer. So where does this leave the Liberals politically? Let's bring back our front bench, Sharon Carr, Jamie Ellerton, Carl Belanger, and Robert Benzie. Sharon, I'll start with you. What are the chances that the Liberals lose tonight?
Well,
please don't tell me we're going to another election here.
Honestly, this is such a bizarre situation because I don't think they're going to lose the vote. I think that there's a lot of discussion that could be had around how they ended up in this position and how votes are done. But I don't think they're going to, because we just heard the NDP interim leader say that this wasn't a worker-centric throne speech. But and I mean this with respect. I don't think the NDP gets to have a say. They lost their party status. They lost their leaders. So they can say they're going to vote against it. But OK, that's great for you guys. I think we're going to see some movement maybe on the Bloc side to come on board, because let's be real, nobody wants an election again. It's been less than 60 days, even more or less than that, no one wants to have a confidence vote in the government to have to go to the polls again. So I think this is a lot of posturing. This is a non-binding vote. Is it unfortunate this happened? Absolutely. Is the whip and the government House leader going to have to be a bit more thoughtful around how votes are scheduled and the whipping of not only their own caucus votes, but working with other parties? I know there's a lot of people who think that there was nothing wrong that was done from the government side. But, you know, there is a period of time when you have to reach out to the NDP or the Bloc to say, will you vote with us on this, to avoid getting into situations like this. So I think they're going to be fine today, but it's a bizarre time we live in.
I think Sharon there at the end is referencing this amendment, this whole the whole thing that happened yesterday on the wider decision by the NDP, Jamie, to vote against the throne speech. I do think it's interesting. Sharon's right. They obviously don't, they don't have official party status, but it does signify like a change in the dynamics of Parliament. Insofar as the last Liberal minority counted explicitly on the support of the NDP to govern almost as though they were a majority. Mr. Davies' point on our show earlier was like, no, basically nobody reached out to us. They didn't consult us. They didn't feel that they needed to include anything that reflected our priorities, which is literally as different as you could get from the Trudeau government from 2022 to 2024. What does that tell you, Jamie?
I think there's probably a few things going on here, Vashi. One, losing political parties tend to overcorrect for the lessons they should have run in the last campaign and apply it to their current situation. And I think that's what you're seeing from Don Davies and the NDP here, and saying they're not voting for it. And like, we deserve to exist independent of the Liberals in the minds of Canadians. I think if the rest of the sales job we heard on your show a few minutes ago is how they're going to go about it, I don't think their political fortunes are really going to change. He essentially said he's given up on ever trying to even think about the federal budget and how to manage public finances by refusing to answer some very basic questions that you put to him. But I think when you look at the broader political dynamic to this, I think there's a real aspect to Mark Carney's government that is green, and is probably where he shows the most vulnerability, which is actually dealing with the politics on a day-to-day basis in Parliament. And yes, he has a House leader. Mark Garrison is widely derided from anyone who's not a Liberal in that House of Commons, and having them as the whip and kind of the horse trading that goes on to get these things done, he's going to have to show a lot of actual humility, which his public profile would demonstrate he's truly incapable of so far. And so the kind of parliamentary machinations and the actual human-to-human relationships and being an adult to get stuff done and not just like feeling great after you press send on a tweet is probably the biggest question mark over his government right now.
I do think it'll be interesting if ultimately, let's say, it's Conservative support, Carl, that puts the thrones, that secures enough support for the throne speech to pass in the government to stare down its first confidence. So, like, that is just a change from where we were 6 months ago.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a possibility. I mean, I think we can argue that Mark Carney's throne speech is certainly way more to the right than any of Justin Trudeau's throne speech. So in that sense, it's a fairly progressive conservative, let's say, speech. But if I were to put $2 on it, I would say the Bloc is more likely to support the throne speech. Yves-François Blanchet was very clear that he thought that the Mark Carney Liberals deserve at least a year. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Bloc was lining up behind the government here. But if it's not going to happen, it's up to the Prime Minister to earn the confidence of the House and to test the confidence of the House and to hold it. So if Mark Carney is not willing to budge and negotiate and discuss with any of the other parties, then he's going to go down the way of Joe Clark. Joe Clark also had an option in the House back in '79. He had a rump of social credit MPs who could have saved this government, but he didn't want to negotiate with them. So eventually he went down because of that. Now, of course, the warning for the NDP is that after the Socred did that, they got wiped out and they never came back in the House. They never were elected again, not a single MP. So that's the warning the Democrats should think about.
What do you think about, Benzie, the possibility, like the sort of politics of it all, and the idea that you do get the sense that at least at the outset, that the Carney government is governing as though it is, they feel like it's a majority?
I mean, it is a de facto majority, but it isn't in practice a practical majority, unfortunately for them. I think Carl's echoing something that a very smart conservative friend of mine told me today about wondering if they're governing like Joe Clark in '79. And remember, Clark went into that confidence vote. He was not happy that he was going to have to go into an election, but the Tories in 1979, the progressive conservatives as they then were, thought that they were going to win the election. The Liberals didn't have a leader. Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, had stepped away from politics. Then, of course, Trudeau comes back in the greatest comeback in Canadian political history, arguably. 1980 wins a huge majority, even more than Carney in terms of popular vote than Carney got on April 28th. Having said all of that, Vashi, I do not believe that any of the parties want an election. And if there were one, I think Carney would win a majority. He would get a majority. And then there would be a lot of soul searching that the NDP especially would have to do, because I don't think that it would necessarily, I don't think 7 would even be, they'd be lucky if they had 7. I think the Bloc would lose some seats. And I think the Tories would too, to be honest with you. I think they're damaged goods. The polls that I've seen and that you've seen, Vashi, since the election, Carney's up, the Tories are down a little bit. So I'm not sure anyone wants an election except possibly Mark Carney, and I don't think he needs one.
There's another twist to that, Vashi, if I may add.
Yes.
So soon after an election, the Governor General could turn to Pierre Poilievre and ask him to form a government and test the confidence of the House.
No, but he's not an MP. He's not an MP.
It doesn't matter. In our system, you don't need to be an MP to be prime minister. That's a funny thing. You needed to be the leader of the House.
Didn't you learn this in March when Prime Minister Carney became the prime minister? Come on.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, there's so many scenarios being floated right now. Everyone's going to have to tune in for that vote in the next hour. Guys, thank you so much. Our front bench, Sharon Curry, Jamie Ellington, Carl Belanger, and Rob Benzie, constitutional experts. They are. Thanks, everyone. We're going to take a quick break. We've got more Power Play just ahead.
Prime Minister, do you plan increasing retaliatory tariffs?
Are you looking forward to the match, the game tonight?
Behind every goal and every save is a city united, cheering from living rooms to patios, and yes, even right here on Parliament Hill. Let's bring the Stanley Cup home, back from the U.S. to Canada, where it belongs. Go Oilers, go!
Excitement on Parliament Hill today ahead of the start of the Stanley Cup final. Game 1 goes tonight in Edmonton between the Oilers and Florida Panthers. It's a rematch of last year's final, in which Florida walked away with the championship in a tight 7-game series. The Oilers will be looking for a much different outcome this year, and the final comes on the heels of the Four Nations face-off earlier, which became a symbol, of course, of the backdrop to all of this, a very tense relationship, which we've been talking about all night between Canada and the U.S. CTV's Kathy Lee is with us live outside of Rogers Place in Edmonton, where Game 1 will be happening. I imagine, Kathy, it's going to be pretty crowded there. How pumped are people in Edmonton for tonight?
Oh, Vashi, it is. I mean, this is a rematch, right? Like, how often does a team get to, go back and have another run at the Stanley Cup, but also face a team that they lost to last year, which was completely heartbreaking. I was in Rogers Place when that happened, and the disappointment and the sadness was so palpable. So fans now, like the way that I'm kind of interpreting this when I spoke to them this morning is there's a huge sense of optimism and determination that this is going to be the year that they're going to bring the Stanley Cup home, not just for Edmonton, but for the country. I mean, 1993 was the last time that the Stanley Cup was won, for Canada. And so this is that chance, a second chance to do it again.
And how many people are you expecting in that area that you're in? It was packed over the last series.
And it should be packed tonight as well. As I was walking into the moss pit, there's a line wrapped around, the entire ice district. They haven't let people in yet because it's still pretty early here. There's a couple people, a small handful with Oilers jersey just kind of milling around. But, once things get going in an hour or two, I expect that the moss pit is going to be completely packed. Just that kind of energy and that noise, and everyone's ready for it. This is the coolest thing, though. When I was talking to people just kind of walking around downtown today, the people that were open to doing an interview with me weren't even from from here, from Edmonton or Canada. There's a couple from the UK. They traveled 24 hours to come here. They're huge Oilers fans, and this is the first time that playoff game, let alone a final game, and they cannot wait to get into Rogers Place and just feel that energy, be there live, and just take that game in.
All right, well, have a blast, Kathy. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. That's CTV's Kathy Lee reporting for us in downtown Edmonton. The Oilers, of course, face off later tonight. I'm going to leave Power Play there. I'm off on assignment tomorrow. Michael Couture will be in the chair. Have a great night.